Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to PR Newswire's AI Search Pulse webinar series. Today our topic is going to be how small businesses can compete in AI search. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time with us today. My name is Glenn Freitas, VP of Distribution here at PR Newswire, and I'll be your host today. Before I intro our wonderful guest, I'm going to go over some housekeeping as we always do. First, you can rearrange, resize, and minimize the boxes on your screen to your liking, so feel free to adjust as needed. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, the bottom icon on the left side of your screen opens to some troubleshooting tips, or you may also submit your issue in the question box, which we will have a few people monitoring. We will have time for audience Q&A. We do try to keep our new series to just about 30 minutes. If we run over 1 minute, that's okay. And as always, if we can't get to your questions, we will afterwards. And we promise, as often, a follow-up blog post related to a lot of the Q&A that you guys, or everybody in our audience has today. At the bottom of your screen is a box that says speak to an expert, where you can let us know if you're interested in a free consultation with a PR Newswire expert following today's session. And the resource section has additional information, as always, for comms professionals like yourself that you might find valuable. And finally, as always, today's session is being recorded. For all who registered, you will receive an on-demand video to rewatch or share with colleagues at your own more timely fashion, whenever it matches, whenever you're available to watch us. So for today, I have the pleasure to discuss the answer layer visibility and how small and medium brands can compete and be discovered in that answer layer with Marissa Beaumont, Vice President, Fishman Public Relations. Thank you for joining me, Marissa.
Thanks for having me.
Can you give our audience just a quick little background of who you are, where you come from, and then I'd say let's take a deep dive really quick into what you and your agency have been doing in regards to supporting your many various clients, especially the past year when it comes to this topic today in terms of just AI discoverability.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been with Fishman PR for, 5.5 going on 6 years now. It was my first step into the franchise space. So that is our specialty. Franchise brands are our bread and butter. We actually just celebrated our agency 35 years, which is really exciting. So we represent over 100 brands in the franchise space. Across nearly every industry, whether that's home services, pets, health and wellness, fitness, food and beverage, you name it. Various industries, but they all have one thing in common, which is they are a franchise brand. Because that is our specialty, many of these brands, the main reason that they hire us is to help just create more awareness of their franchise opportunity for people, interested in investing and becoming a franchisee and owning, their own franchise with that brand. But also, they hire us for consumer PR support. And then, another big part of the services we offer is grand opening. So every time, one of those local owners does have an opening, we have a proprietary program for that. We started providing AI visibility, / GEO services. I know there's a lot of different names for it at the top of the year. Myself, along with our chief strategy officer, have been the one kind of spearheading this new effort. So, we invested in a new tool to help with AI reporting, and we've been delivering clients with a report each quarter. It just shows their AI visibility, give them some good metrics, but the key part of that is giving them tangible recommendations on things that they can put into motion now, quarter by quarter, whatever it might be, to help improve their AI visibility.
What do you think, as I share the next slide here with our audience, what has stood out to you from, you've been doing this for more than a minute, and AI and the impact of the LLMs on discoverability? let's say let's go with 2 years. Although I think, like you said, and yes, the acronyms sometimes are overwhelming. Go back a few more years than that. But let's say, so compared to 2 and previous years to today, what stands out the most in terms of how you're supporting brands behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like AI visibility has given just even more value to our work as PR professionals than ever. Even just something as simple as, we used to put a release on the wire, make sure, those links are included for SEO purposes, and, we do our due diligence. Now it's still doing that. That still is important. SEO still is important. But how can we take that a step further? Still leveraging the wire for a press release, just for example. But, the outreach that we do with earned media, that's a really important piece. Putting that press release also on your own website for own content, LinkedIn, just really like gaining the extra miles out of that. It's really just more of a holistic approach because the LLMs are crawling all of these different types of sources, whether it be video content on YouTube, like I said, LinkedIn, social, blog pages, earned media, all of those things. So you really do need a integrated approach.
Yeah, that stands out to me too, especially. Yeah, it's funny. I get asked all the time, so should I just send more press releases? And I say no, even though I want to say yes. But it really is taking, as we're sharing here with our audience, the multi-channel approach. It's not necessarily about sending more and potentially low value news updates for a brand, but making sure you're repurposing that one good brand story across every potential channel. Mm-hmm. Where do you find it the most difficult, especially talking to our audience today, specifically around SMBs? Where do you find it most difficult in regards to really just getting traction? What channel is? I know it's not going to be The Wire, because PR Newswire, who you work with, is wonderful. But what channel stands out in regards to just having a tough time in regards to getting good audience engagement? Is it, getting people to go to a company's website? Is it getting good earned media coverage, social channels? Which one stands out the most to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's so interesting, and I kind of sometimes nerd out about the data myself, but just kind of seeing how much things have changed from the beginning of the year to now. So just as an example, social platforms have continued to grow in priority for LLMs. They're citing from social platforms more and more. And in fact, YouTube is actually the #1 source across all LLMs right now. And I feel like YouTube was a little bit of a priority, 7, 8, 10 years ago, whatever it might have been. Mm-hmm. Then there were just so many other things that were popping up that brands were kind of struggling with, like, what do I prioritize? So I feel like almost, it's a little bit of a mindset shift of reinvesting in some of those things that might have fallen to the back burner a little bit, like your own YouTube channel. And also too, just making sure that some of those different landing pages on your website, blog pages, if you have like a news page too, making sure that that's up to date as well.
That is a good call out. It's interesting too, and I'm sure your LinkedIn feed has somewhat of the same, knowing your background and your recent history, the same algorithm. It almost feels like almost every day you see a different report on the rise of YouTube. I saw this morning and yesterday the fall of Reddit in ChatGPT and how they are now have a much smaller percentage of being in the top citation list for ChatGPT specifically after their most recent model upgrade. So it's interesting in terms of what would be your advice for our audience in what their approach should be here. I would say let's stick to like the next 6 months, knowing that, a 2-year strategy plan might be a little idealistic in this AI search era, as things continually seem to change here with these model updates and, YouTube rising and Reddit falling, and that could change here in 3 months and that could switch. What would be your advice in terms of what a smaller brand should be looking at and what their strategy should be in regards to what matters the most for you?
Yeah, well, first, it's important to like make sure you're keeping a pulse on how these things are changing. Because just like I said, a few minutes ago, YouTube was really not the number one or even within the top 5 sources at the beginning of the year. Now it is number one. So it is changing, but YouTube has consistently remained in the top over the last few months. So I feel like that, that kind of data set is leveling out. But I mean, yeah, as I mentioned, a holistic approach is best, but obviously some of these small to medium-sized businesses, don't have as big of teams as the biggies or as many resources. So if you really just kind of had to pick one area, maybe 2 areas to focus on, I would say auditing your owned content, your website, landing pages, blog pages, the news pages of your site as well. And then also prioritizing social, specifically YouTube and LinkedIn.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are the 2 that you can get the most and the quickest ROI. When it comes to LinkedIn, I've talked to a lot of brands around, and I'm curious what your perspective is. You see a lot of different reports on the difference between a corporate feed making an announcement versus an individual SME or an individual executive making an announcement. And again, I just saw this yesterday in my LinkedIn feed from a particular report where they cited the fact that individuals get a lot more citation ranking than a corporate feed. What is your take on that?
Yeah, so that's something that we offer services for both, and it's very interesting. It sometimes also might just kind of depend on the brand and the industry, but as I've been pulling my own quarterly reports for clients and digging into their LinkedIn source and seeing what outlets they're pulling from, I've noticed that the executives that are posting more consistently, following a good structure, clear, concise messaging, using good data points and numbers when they can. The LLMs are pulling from those a bit more than maybe corporate pages are. But then again, some brands that maybe they are putting more of their efforts toward the corporate pages, and again, clear, concise content, data using when they can. Those are pulling through more. So, I mean, I think too, it also just, depends on where your resources are. If you have a corporate executive that is willing and, putting obviously LinkedIn posts, they take time to think of, take time to write. So if you're, able to dedicate the time for, posting for a corporate executive, the ROI is definitely there.
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel it goes back to an old Google acronym I loved, EEAT, expert, authority, trust. And I think it goes to the trust signal in that trust and authority, really, in terms of, and that's why I think too, and we've gotten a couple of questions already related to Reddit, why Reddit goes up, why it goes down, why did Reddit ever have any stake in AI search to the answer layer? I think LLMs really like to see the individual source rather than a brand source sometimes. But I think you call out too, it also just depends. It depends on what industry you're in. And more than ever, it depends on what the LLM sees as the intent of your prompt. Because if you put in, you can change 1 or 2 words in a prompt on Google, traditional Google search, where 50% of the time you're going to get AI overview answers now, and it's going to continue to rise more and more. By tweaking 1 or 2 words, sometimes Google will push back an AI overview answer. Sometimes they'll push back 10 different places where you can potentially purchase a product, from Amazon to Target, etc. Sometimes it'll lead, they have so many different search features that are trying to understand the intent. How do you talk to clients about that in regards to making sure across their socials that they have, that they're, I guess, what is your advice to your clients and to our audience in regards to your approach to, beyond what you said, you need the time to do it, but what goes into the actual content? What are some good best practices in regards to, I don't want to say manipulating the LLM in making sure that you then, fall into that answer layer, but just making sure that what you intend is what is being understood by LLMs and traditional Google search. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Great question. I'll say that, LLMs are looking for something that they can crawl and cite easily. So, and we even say this too for press releases and blog content that you may be putting out, FAQs, bullet points, those types of things. They can crawl and cite those easily. But for LinkedIn, I would recommend, especially if it was, a corporate page or an executive's, personal LinkedIn page, not just posting about just general brand updates, but making sure that you are creating content that's answering the questions that LLMs are pulling from. And, that all starts with obviously the prompt that you are setting up, in your AI visibility reporting tool. So for some of our brands, they want to understand what people think about their franchise opportunity. What are some differentiators if they are picking from this food and beverage franchise compared to this one? So making sure that you're answering those types of questions for a prospective franchisee that might be interested in making an investment with that franchise. So yeah, not just creating a post for the sake of creating a post and getting content out there, but being intentional with it, answering the questions that your audience is searching for. And again, as I mentioned, clear, concise, using data points and numbers whenever possible as well.
I love that. I think that's a big key takeaway for our audience today, small or large brand, honestly, in regards to, my take on it, summarizing what you just said. It's, why does this matter? And why does this matter for your human audience, a journalist that you want good media coverage from? And why does this matter related to, like you said, the future prompts that might surface that piece of content, whether it's a LinkedIn post or it's a blog post or it's a press release you sent out? I think having just being really intentional is important. And I think it's a little bit of a lost art, as I scan through dozens and dozens of press releases every day in my job. And I know you are very much in the weeds in regards to looking and reviewing content. You still see a majority of brands publishing news just to publish it and to not really have it structured and broken out. I guess that would be a good question. And again, a good takeaway for our audience. What is your favorite element? You mentioned a few of them, whether it's just bullets or good executive quotes that are answering in detail why this matters, why this can help you. FAQs, which we've talked a lot about at PR Newswire. What's your favorite newer element that you like to incorporate into content now?
I'm a sucker for some bullet points, honestly. And sometimes it even makes it easier when you're writing a press release and you're like, how do I write all of this succinctly in a nice paragraph? Sometimes it is easier to bullet out those points, whether it be an event that might be going on or, a sweepstakes where there's different elements. Maybe there's something happening in store, but also has something happening on social and on the client's app, whatever it might be. I'm a sucker for some bullet points.
Love it. I am too. I'll add on bullet points near the top of the release too, before somebody has to start scrolling.
Yep.
Above the fold, as they would say.
Above the fold, yep.
So we're getting a lot of good questions. I have one question for you. I know, and full disclosure, we did obviously a prep call, and you had mentioned on that prep call YouTube as well, and you're seeing more and more traction and higher citation ranking for YouTube. Do you have advice for so that's it's a little bit of a reach sometimes for clients with a smaller budget to do video PR, video marketing. What are some best practices that somebody, a brand, a smaller brand especially, can utilize in regards to getting a good foothold on the YouTube channel? What do you advise your clients on?
Yeah, and obviously it's great if you can invest in, a videographer of some sort and, somebody who's able to really dedicate the time. But
Yeah.
even just starting with, if you used to have a YouTube channel that you would post things on, let's go back there. Let's just take a look, because we are seeing that, for some of our brands, it is pulling a YouTube video that they may have posted 6 years ago. So just going back, kind of refreshing some of that, even some of the, descriptions or brand messaging that you might have like on your channel, like your YouTube profile, so to speak. But there's also an easy ways to, leverage YouTube without a big budget. So, earned media. When podcasts are huge, a lot of our, the executives we represent, they love podcasts, and everybody has a podcast nowadays. So there's so much out there. But if that is part of your earned media strategy, which it should be, once that podcast does go live, oftentimes that podcast has their own YouTube channel where they're pulling from. But you can repurpose that one podcast interview into different clips, and use it to republish content on YouTube. I'm sure too, brands already have a social media strategy. They're filming different content for, their Instagram page. There's different ways that things can be repurposed. I mean, even just taking your CEO, founder, CMO, whatever it might be, pulling them aside, 30 minutes and just filming some clips, on your iPhone. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it with a smaller budget.
I love that. I think that's a good takeaway in terms of, yes, I think you don't have to play with the IBMs of the world necessarily to get good traction. And I think that's the takeaway. And the overall theme of today's webinar is smaller brands can have a better place in the answer layer than I think they could 5 years ago in more traditional search results. And I think we're seeing, and I'm getting questions around this, and I think it speaks to the slide we're sharing here. It speaks to, it's an ever-changing digital landscape. I'll use a fun phrase, a fun key term there. In that, again, like we talked about at the beginning, things are changing month to month, every updated model. In regards to priority for a small brand, what are your one or two, by no means you don't need to speak to every one of these channels that we're spotlighting here, the 5 leaders here, but what are one or two takeaways in terms of prioritizing beyond YouTube? We got some questions around Claude. We have some questions also from our audience today around, the different licensing agreements that a particular LLM will have with a particular publisher. And so then that publisher is doing their best to block other LLMs they might not have agreements with. How does a smaller brand play in that landscape in terms of making sure they're doing all they can to connect with their audience, again, no matter where their audience is finding them?
Yeah, I think the best approach is having strategies for each of these, but I know that's tough. Each of these LLMs do respond and behave a little differently. So I think it really does start with knowing where your audience is. The typical everyday user of an LLM is probably using ChatGPT. Google lovers lean toward Gemini, B2B leans a little bit more toward Claude. So, knowing where your target audience, who they are, can kind of infer which LLM that they're using. But if you really just had to pick one to start with, because it's hard to have a strategy for all of these, prioritize all of these different channels. I would probably recommend starting with ChatGPT, the OG, if you will, because that, like I said, that is where the common everyday user is. Yeah, I agree.
And then I think my 2 cents would be then to focus on, I'm a big fan of AI overview, and I think it's, while by no means is it under the radar, that's funny, I think it has the ability to become even more of a presence in the future, because traditional Google search still dominates the overall search landscape. It still dominates ChatGPT users and monthly usage numbers. So I think the more that they push AI overview at Google, I think it's going to become more and more of an influencer that you need to strategize for. As we wrap up here, we wanted to give a couple of tangible examples, Marissa and I did, for our audience. Can you talk to us about building brand credibility, and specifically for Pet Supply Plus, and just what it takes for a smaller brand? And again, I get that, this is not just necessarily a individual local small brand. It's, a large national franchise. But I think you have a good perspective on, and the one example here for the Detroit area rescues, on the impact of good content and good strategy around a smaller regional brand and what they can do to get themselves in that answer layer. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So like, as you mentioned, yes, Pet Supplies Plus is a national franchise. They are headquartered in Detroit. And they have a lot of different, philanthropic initiatives, community initiatives. That's really, at the core of who the brand is. So anytime that there is something going on in the Detroit area, we make sure that we're doing a press release on it, because, they are well known in that space. The media is familiar with them. Of course, like obviously just the average consumer is familiar with them. So we do make sure that we prioritize, putting out brand news within that area. And as you can see, we did use one of my favorite bullet point formats in that particular press release, just to kind of get across the information. But, it's important to still be pushing out, even if, you do have a brand that is sprinkled across the US, but maybe they are heavy in one region and there might be something going on, still prioritizing, brand announcements in that area, followed up with earned media strategies for just that kind of holistic approach.
Yeah, I like that. And yes, I noticed the bullets. That was that was a good tie-in, unintentional. That was perfect. And then last, we saw this on the PR Newswire side. This story got a lot of good traction and visibility. And I think it's a good example for our audience in terms of just everything we've talked about today, in terms of authority, brand trust, leading with good data, as Marissa mentioned. And I think this is a good example of the story of a brand who's competing with some very large brands in this industry, and just making sure that they're doing all they can to have good structured content, and then repurposing, as both Marissa and I talked about, that good story, that good content across multiple channels. They don't need to send 5 more press releases as a follow-up related to this particular story and the data that they generated themselves, but you want to repurpose a good key data point, like they highlight here in the press release with the 72% infographic, InfoBite, making sure you repurpose that across all of your different social channels. And then they did, as you lead with your bullets and your favorite for bullets, I think my favorite quick AEO related win is FAQs, which this brand utilized quite well. And especially they went with the very high level unbranded FAQ, where they're really trying to just be good thought leaders. And it's not necessarily specific to pushing in the question that they put into the press release, into the FAQ section, their products. They're more taking a more thought leadership and just overall industry leadership approach. So I thought this was a good example for that.
Yeah.
So we are 1 minute over. I will ask Marissa for you to give our audience first. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You were great. I think the advice you gave our clients and your perspective and story is a great one for honestly all brands of all sizes, but especially for SMBs. If there was one takeaway for our audience today that you want them to go to market with, if you will, for, again, just the rest of this year, what would be that a piece of advice that you'd give them?
If you don't already have an AI visibility strategy, get to work on one immediately. And one thing that we didn't get to touch on that I do want to just quickly mention is, once you start doing reporting on AI visibility, you're going to get a lot of really great data, but I like to spend a little extra time looking at the sources where the LLMs are pulling from, and then understanding the brand's perception in those sources, what the sentiment is, because then you can put together, really direct targeted strategies for your brand based off of those. So
no, that's a good call out. And we've talked about that on other webinars in terms of the source layer. And I think it's often a surprise for the brands that you're supporting and the brands that I've talked to one-on-one, who they're competing with in that source layer. It's not always their direct competitor. They're competing with, whether it's blogger, a small blogger who doesn't even get that much engagement on YouTube or their own individual blog page, but they have such good content that they're surfacing in AI search results really well. I think that's a good final call out in terms of just having, like you said, a good AI strategy and making sure you understand who's controlling the narrative for your individual brand. So,
absolutely.
Thank you, Marissa. I appreciate you taking the time again with us today. You were great, and hopefully our audience got a few good key takeaways. And as promised, this is recorded and it is available on demand as a follow-up. And we will post a follow-up blog addressing the few other questions that we got, and just an overall summary of today's chat. So thanks again for joining me today, Marissa.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.